Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's panel webinar, New Opportunities for People with Disabilities Post-COVID-19. My name is Yusra Benjeloun, Administrative Coordinator and Projects Manager with the Work Wellness Institute, and I'll be co-moderating today's webinar. We're honored to welcome our presenters, Dr. Michel Landry, Shawn Raaf, and Jamie Miller-Dixon. Also with us today, our co-moderator for this webinar, Maureen Han.
First one, and of course, we were probably, quote unquote, preaching to the choir here. Those of you who are attending are probably here because you're interested in this field, but and you'll know some of the details. But I do want to talk a little bit about the number and percentages of people who live with a disability on a global perspective. I'll argue, based on some of our own research, around the diaspora of high, middle, and low-income countries, but I'll also argue that low-income communities in Canada, or in my case, the United States, often are in the same environmental conundrum as low-income countries, as you might think about. And so this is called the middle-income trap. And so I'll maybe make a point or two about that. The second point I'd like to communicate is around universal design features, and there's a typo there, I apologize. And the fact that universal design features helped everyone, and I think the pandemic has helped us understand this in quite elaborate ways. I'll make a point or two about that. I'll end here by talking about some of our research that we're doing in North Carolina regarding the disproportionate impact on people with disabilities, and end with a point that I'd like to argue around the need for greater equity, including around employment for people with disabilities as a mainstream factor inside of our pandemic response patterning, which has not, I don't believe, has been as robust as it should have been. Universal design features, again, something that you all, I'm sure, will know, but this has become a really important aspect of the pandemic response. It also is a little bit of background. As a physical therapist, I've worked for the last 20 years in disaster zones, in infectious disease outbreaks around the world. And we only, I would say, in the last 5 to 8 years have we seen a real mainstreaming of disability as part of disaster response. But what is important here is that we talk a little bit about the difference of equity and equality. And policymakers in general think about it from an equality perspective. Let's provide serve to everybody, or let's provide it to, a sort of a blunt object here. But that misses the point a lot with people with disabilities, which is why we talk about equity. And so equity, of course, is the middle picture you see here, where we would provide a different level of support based on people's needs. So equity, I think, becomes a real mediating factor towards employment. Some of the research we're doing is identifying that people with disabilities are really struggling with this digital transformation of work towards mostly online. Think of persons who live with complete blindness, people with mobility, challenges. So I think we're going to have to start thinking a little bit more around equity as really one of these mediating factors. Just this is probably my last slide here, and I just want to share a little bit around some of our initial findings. So what we are seeing, at least here in North America, or in North Carolina, is that the pandemic has had a really important and disproportionate impact on persons with intellectual disabilities. So in particular, we have, and we're in the process of analyzing our data, but we have stories and we have recounts of people who just simply cannot pivot and work at home. Most of you today, I certainly am, in my basement office, and that's because I'm fairly privileged and I can easily do that pivot. And my type of employment allows me to do it, but that's not the case for everyone. And so even from an issue of transport to and from work or a work setting, this has been a challenge. The assumption around digital transformation is equally effective for everyone has been a gross misunderstanding of persons with disabilities and universal design. And probably the third is that, during lockdown procedures, people with disabilities have much less ability in general to be able to mobilize in the same ways we might. Some of our participants are recounting how in many ways they've become target of unfortunate scams, and so it just becomes a really difficult scenario, and we are definitely seeing a disproportionate impact on them. How do you solve it? Well, you solve it, I think, by again using the situation we have now as a pivot point. How can we pivot out of this and create the right environment so that we have universal design, so that everyone has equity towards a more holistic approach to employment. Gainful and meaningful employment is not just around a financial burden or a financial discussion. It really is around the worth of the individual.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So the goal of the survey was really to capture real-time responses from service providers in terms of what they were seeing with respect to their clients. It was really to help us understand, what was going on, what were some of those barriers for people with disabilities in terms of being ready or willing to work at this time. I just want to be very mindful here that we're presenting a survey that was completed by a select group of service providers here in BC over a specific time period. There was no real sampling frame. It was just really trying to engage as many organizations out there as possible to hear from them about what might be going on with their clients or their employees. So I think of it as a qualitative study in terms of just it's providing some insights, but it shouldn't be interpreted as what's going on in terms of job seekers as a whole across BC. But we hope that, in terms of conversations and sort of reflections from other data sources, we can kind of get a sense of how this aligns with what truly might be going on for people with disabilities right now. So when we asked the respondents to talk about, identify how their clients or employees might be disengaging from employment during the pandemic, we found out that we had 93% of clients being in a position where they're not wanting to accept or return to available employment opportunities. So they might be engaging in employment, they might be offered opportunities to take on a position or pursue an opportunity, and they've decided at this time to not do that. 89% have indicated that they are not currently seeking employment, and then over half are no longer engaging with their organization. That might be a temporary situation where they've completely kind of disappeared, or they might have actually dropped off their roles completely. So it seems that during COVID, clients are not fully disengaged from services, but we are still seeing that high level of disengagement. That is a real issue. So the real question is, what is going on with people who are not represented here? What might be their situation? What might be holding them back from actually wanting to meet with a Work BC job counselor, go into work with a social enterprise and that sort of thing. So when we asked about reasons that their clients or employees might be indicating in terms of why they're not engaging with employment at this time, there's a few reasons that really stood out. Almost half indicated that they had decreased motivation, that they're seeing decreased motivation among their clients. This could be either due to stresses or anxieties due to COVID. Michael was talking about transportation issues. It could be issues around going to work on transit. It could be about working in a workplace in close proximity to other employees or with customers. It could be about expectations about the precarity of that position. 41% indicated that they had their own personal health concerns related to COVID-19 that might, situations that might predispose them to being at higher risk. 41% were worried about exposure to COVID in the workplace. 38% were worried about exposure in terms of public transit. 28%, so just over a quarter, indicated that there were family concerns. And we know that for many people with disabilities, particularly intellectual disabilities, there might be family members who are very much involved in their decision-making around going to work. And those are somehow a factor in terms of their decision right now. Similarly, 28% were worried about job security in this time. There might be a situation where there's an opportunity that might be available. They might be concerned about going into work, starting a position. you know, the implications that might have in terms of being able to hold on to that position longer term, making that commitment. Another 23% indicated that they're worried about their own family responsibilities and how this might impact, how their employment might impact on their family. We were really surprised to see such a low percentage indicating that either loss of CERB, so the relief benefits that were available through the government, or their current disability assistance were factors in that decision. So that for us, that was quite a low percentage. So it's really these other factors that are having a much greater impact in terms of what's going on for people right now, at least in terms of what we're seeing. And we're really interested to hear from you how that kind of aligns with what you might be seeing in your own organizations.
So when we asked for further insights from our service partners about their clients' disengagement from employment, it really highlighted 4 main themes, and here they are up on the screen. That's safety, anxiety, vulnerability, and uncertainty. And a perfect example given by one of the service partners is that clients who already face multiple barriers seem to demonstrate less resilience and more anxiety around COVID. And then for employers, another said that the shifting labor market has added an additional complex layer to most businesses, and that physical distancing, PPEs, having to think about another layer of accommodation was very challenging to employers, especially early on. The results from the survey suggested to us that additional supports were needed for both employers and job seekers, and the results suggest that the pandemic has exacerbated the gap that was already there for job seekers with disabilities and employers. Yeah, so here's the key lessons learned from the survey. The key lessons is it really highlighted the need to adapt to the reality of COVID. There are new realities here. It's not just business as usual, and it won't be for a while. Employers required further supports to adjust their practices and their approaches to engage people with disabilities during the pandemic. And the persistence of the pandemic required understanding how job seekers engage in employment currently and shift to longer term thinking. Concerns about personal safety and job security present real barriers to employment for vulnerable job seekers, so need to take extra steps to address deeper underlying concerns of job seekers with disabilities. But it does present an opportunity to change approaches and prepare job seekers for in-demand positions now for when recruitment resumes and people are ready and able to get back to work. So it is an opportunity. It does present an opportunity at this stage to start thinking about how do we start to prepare people for those opportunities when the economy opens up. Yeah, so for us, what we saw, we looked at this as what we saw pre-COVID, onset of COVID, and currently. So pre-COVID, I think most sectors across the country were experiencing pretty major workforce shortages. And for us, what we noticed in BC Wind, there was a really high level of employer engagement and real significant momentum around hiring people with disabilities. So pre-COVID, lots of opportunities, lots of momentum, key employer engagement was really high. And then as we saw the onset of COVID, we had major layoffs with the employers that we were working with, shifted to more remote working opportunities, and most organizations went to no hiring in non-essential for non-essential positions, with exception of some of the retail employers that we work with. For example, London Drugs, they actually hired more people because of the cleaning requirements and the distancing requirements in the store. But most of the other businesses we work with went to no hiring opportunities. And so there was a decrease in hiring people with disabilities. You know, we're almost at a year. And so currently, you know, one of our larger employers and large employers of people with disabilities is the tourism and hospitality sector. Think of, you know, hotels, restaurants. That sector's decimated, and will stay that way for a while. So we don't anticipate that those large employers will be resuming their hiring of people with disabilities anytime soon. But what we're noticing is opportunities are opening up slowly. and we're returning to a heightened return to inclusivity. I'll share with you in a moment just some of the things that we've been doing. So that's helped us. You know, we're in a position, we're in a really unique position given our relationship with our employers and the kinds of organizations that we work with, to take some action based on the survey results. And so while we continue our recruitment and retention for those organizations that have opened up and are starting to recruit, we're building in some additional activities that we started to use. We thought, how could we pivot? How can we shift our activities to support these new realities for the time being? So we looked at opportunities to build and increase capacity with our employers, many of whom were deployed working from home, looking, you know, still going to be retained in their organizations. So what could we do? So we looked at providing training for hiring managers on inclusive hiring and retention, and offering that training either within the organizations or sort of en masse through sessions we were hosting over Zoom. Also looking at how can we work with HR teams and help them understand a bigger picture around inclusive hiring and retention, and ways that they can actually influence some of the hiring managers. So that worked really well with the organizations we were working with. Some of the things that we're also undertaking from now until June is conducting accessibility reviews of the current recruitment and retention practices that are used in organizations that we work with. Almost all of them wanted that, so that was really great. So that when they're ready to resume hiring, and they will get back to resuming hiring, maybe not to levels pre-COVID, but they will get back to hiring large amounts of employees again. How can we prepare them to be able to do that during the pandemic and following? Well, we saw a drop-off of opportunities and maybe some hesitancy in engaging this talent pool. We're actually starting to see a higher level of engagement now. We also looked at how can we help organizations, you know, be more welcoming of candidates with diverse abilities, and so helping them adjust their career pages, making sure there's an active offer there, looking at job descriptions. Do we really need all of that information, all of those requirements that we've always asked for in a job description that hasn't been changed in 5-10 years? And looking at it, helping them adjust their behavior-based interviews and working with HR teams so that, again, we increase their capacity to be able to do that on an ongoing basis. So yeah, we've been providing hiring manager training. We're actually in the process of developing an e-learning series based on that Untapped Talent B2B guide, but also based on our learnings in BC Win. We found that particularly for people with diverse cognitive abilities, creating some visuals around, you know, what is a day in the life of a stocking associate at London Drugs, show some of the visual requirements of positions so that it might be used as a tool to attract more candidates in the future. One of the cool things we were doing is looking at, you know, the reality with some of our employers, they pre-COVID were not open to remote working opportunities, right? There's a concern around, you know, productivity levels and, you know, will people actually be doing the work? But, you know, some pretty hard realities when the entire workforce is deployed to work from home. And what was a surprise is that productivity levels actually increased and not decreased. And in fact, the problem employees in terms of performance and productivity were still problem employees working from home. So the ones that were on site, not delivering to their full capacity, we're still doing the same thing from home. So what it did for especially the larger organizations, you know, ICBC, Van City, some of the larger companies that we work with, going forward, they see themselves providing remote work opportunities, right? Which is really amazing because they're a large employer and provide services across the province. And so there are opportunities for some remote working arrangements where, especially as Michael was saying early on, you know, in communities where transit isn't great, where people don't have access to a lot of opportunities, maybe some folks are not in a position to be able to leave home, but have the skills and abilities to be trained to do call center opportunities, for example, which is something that we're actually delivering now with BCAA, Van City, and ICBC. So helping them identify opportunities for remote working arrangements, and then what do we need to do to support that, either through technology. And finally, one of the best and most fun things we've been doing over the last few weeks is developing customized online training cohorts for people with disabilities to prepare for jobs that are expected to be in demand as recruitment resumes. And those jobs are all call center based. Some can be done remotely and some can be done on site. So we've actually got about 68 people who went through that training, and we're in the process this week of making those recommendations out to the employers. So, it did present some really interesting opportunities for us. And again, I'm noticing our recruitment team, our inclusive workforce consulting team is noticing that there is a recognition that the organizations that started down this journey a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and that they clearly didn't want to leave all of the progress that they've made behind. They did not want to leave people with disabilities behind, and are putting effort into ensuring that they continue, not stop, their initiative around inclusive hiring. So we're really looking forward to all of these next steps and seeing what it produces. And Shawn and Laura, our colleague who's part of the research team, will be researching how, what these additional efforts produced in terms of outcomes and results. And I'm sure we'll look forward to sharing that with you in the future.
Wow, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and for your knowledge and your expertise and your leadership in this area. I know that I was busy taking lots of notes myself. So there are lots of questions in the chat box, so I'm gonna get to those now. So the first one is to Michael. In your opinion, what are the best practices for employers within the recruitment process to make it clear that they are open and willing to accommodate those applicants with a disability, i.e. going beyond the general statement of a job posting that says we welcome applications from all abilities and those needing accommodations, please inform the recruiter. So actually maybe that's a question for the full panel.
Yeah, that's well, I'll share some thoughts, but my current role, I don't have to meet payroll at the end of every month, so I'm not an employer, but I'll share what I think. And the first is, at least in workforce theory, the best signal of a thought or a value is to have others who have lived it communicate. It's almost like a wrong word here, but like have disciples or cheerleaders out there saying, hey, you know what? This company, this is what they did, worked really well, and it wasn't just during the employment, it actually went across the trajectory. So I think word of mouth becomes really important. Number two, it's I think some of the other areas of diversity inclusion, I might suggest the LGBTQ community in particular, with sort of symbolic symbols that you can put on your website, essentially to say, hey, listen, we're open for business here, and allyship. So at least here at Duke University, there's a little tag that you can put on your email or even your department, and it's around LGBTQ allyship, and it says I'm an ally. So it kind of feels a little bit like like signaling here, virtue signaling, but I think when it's followed up with meaning, then it actually makes sense. Those are two thoughts.
Excellent, thank you. Jamie or Shawn, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, if I could, yes. I think Michael's absolutely right, and it speaks to a business reputation as well. What do you set your business up for to be known? And it's not enough just to put the statement out there, but do nothing to support it. So I think even having visuals on your on your website that depict diverse people, right? And that depict your community. That there's at least people with visible disabilities included on the career site. I think partnering too with trusted organizations that are going to get your business needs. They understand that you are the client and can refer candidates who are a good match to what your business culture is all about. Mm-hmm. And finally, I think if you have a goal for a respectful workplace culture, it is a lot easier for D&I to happen, because who doesn't want to work for a respectful employer? Who doesn't want to be part of that type of culture? So respect is a goal that is something, if you don't have levels of respect in your workplace, this isn't going to work for you.
I would just add, there's so many resources out there to support employers right now. We joke about, toolkits, and it seems like there's a new toolkit coming out all the time, and they're employers can tap into so much in terms of establishing the business case, understanding how to recruit and retain people with disabilities. So I think that's an important piece, is for employers to sort of access those and understand that there's a lot of people out there who are willing to support and not just stand alongside, but also like help make this happen for them. So I think that's such an important piece. And I think it really speaks to being a better employer. I mean, it's not just about bringing new people into your workplace. It's recognizing people who are already there, who may have different situations going on. There's that intersectionality piece, I think, Michael, that you're speaking to some extent. And being a more inclusive employer just means you're a better employer, and you're going to reap these amazing benefits in terms of happier employees and people who want to stay with your organization for a longer period of time.
Yeah, and just sitting here listening to the three of you answer that, I think that it's taking away little bits from each of what you've said, because Michael, you're talking about that kind of the sticker on the door, and we've used that analogy before with employers, because as Jamie and Shawn have said, if you put that sticker on your door, you better be ready for people with disabilities to walk through, or in some cases roll through, right? Like, you better be ready for this, and if you're not ready for it, you can't put the sticker up on the door. So I think that's I appreciate all of those comments.